Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the American frontier. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the spring of 1899, a weathered cabin stood in a remote clearing of Colorado's San Juan Mountains. Perched on the edge of a steep ravine, approximately 20 miles northwest of the mining settlement of Silverton, local trappers, hunters, and prospectors knew of its existence, but by that time none would approach it. The cabin had remained abandoned for over 7 years, yet appeared remarkably intact, as if frozen in time, waiting for its occupants to return. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not merely the disappearances associated with the structure, but the consistent reports of unnatural phenomena that persisted long after its abandonment. According to territorial records preserved in the Colorado Historical Society archives, the cabin appeared on no official maps, though its reputation spread through whispered warnings among mountain folk. Reports collected by county officials describe the clearing surrounding the cabin as unnaturally silent, devoid of the wildlife that typically inhabited the region. Even in the height of summer, travelers reported feeling a deep, penetrating cold when passing within sight of the structure. Most peculiar were accounts of the cabin's physical appearance, changing between visits, windows appearing where none had been before, the orientation of the door shifting, though the overall dimensions remained constant. This is the documented account of the Blackwood cabin and the terrible fate that befell those who crossed its threshold, a mystery that would haunt the Colorado mountains for generations and become known in regional folklore as the sentinel that watched both ways. Nathan Blackwood was considered among the last of a dying breed, a true mountain man in an era when the frontier was rapidly disappearing. Born in Kentucky in 1837, Blackwood adventured west as a young man, working as a scout, trapper, and occasional guide throughout the Rocky Mountains. County records from Silverton indicate that Blackwood purchased the land for his cabin in 1882, using gold nuggets and silver coins as payment. The transaction, documented by Land Office Clerk Thomas Wilson, noted Blackwood as a solitary figure of considerable means despite his rough appearance. Unlike many frontier settlers, Blackwood built his cabin not as a temporary shelter, but as a permanent home where he intended to live out his remaining years. The structure was uncommonly well crafted, featuring dovetailed corners, a stone fireplace, and glass windows, rare luxuries in such a remote location. Blackwood's skill as a builder was noted in several accounts from those who visited during the early years of his residence. Local hunters described him as a man of few words but exceptional woodcraft, whose knowledge of the mountains bordered on supernatural. According to journal entries from Silverton shopkeeper Mary Harmon, preserved in the county historical archives, Blackwood made monthly trips to town for supplies, always paying in gold dust or uncut gemstones of questionable origin. He speaks little of his past, Harmon wrote in 1883. Though he bears the scars of someone who has survived much. When asked directly about his history, Blackwood offered only fragments, claiming to have learned his craft from the Shoshone, fought in the war though he would not specify which side, and to have once lived among the Mormons in Utah before some unspecified disagreement forced his departure. What remains consistent across all accounts is his reputation for self-sufficiency and an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns and animal movements that other hunters and trappers found almost impossible to explain through natural means. Between 1882 and 1892, Blackwood's cabin served as an occasional refuge for travelers caught in the mountain's unpredictable weather. The old mountain man maintained a reputation for cautious hospitality, offering shelter and simple meals to those who approached with respect. Everett Hammond, a prospector who sought shelter during a late spring blizzard in 1887, later described Blackwood as a man of few words but considerable wisdom. He shared his hearth and provisions without complaint, though he watched me closely until convinced I posed no threat. Hammond's account, recorded in a letter to his brother preserved in the Denver Public Library's Western Collection, provides one of the most detailed descriptions of the cabin's interior before the events that would transform it into a place of dread. The walls were lined with pelts and tools of his trade. A magnificent elk head watched over the main room. Most striking was his collection of unusual stones arranged on shelves near the fireplace. Minerals of colors I have never seen before or since, some seeming to shift hue when viewed from different angles. Other travelers reported similar experiences during this period. James Thornton, a mining engineer who stayed for 3 nights during the winter of 1884, noted in his journal that Blackwood maintained unusual habits, refusing to sleep during the darkest hours of night and insisting on keeping a fire burning at all times. He rose frequently to check the windows and door, listening intently as if expecting visitors, though no sound reached my ears, Thornton wrote. When questioned, he claimed merely to be concerned about mountain lions, yet his attention seemed directed more toward the distant peaks than the surrounding forest. Despite these eccentricities, Blackwood's reputation as a fair-minded host persisted throughout the decade, his cabin marked by informal word of mouth among travelers as a safe haven in a treacherous landscape. In August of 1892, according to records from the Silverton Assay Office, Blackwood brought several unusual rock samples for testing. Lawrence Wilson, the assayer, noted in his logbook that the specimens contained no precious metals but exhibited peculiar properties unlike any mineral formation previously documented in the region. Wilson described the stones as dark gray with faint purple veining that seemed to pulse in certain light, as if the rock itself were somehow alive. The official report, preserved in the Colorado Geological Survey archives, details unusual characteristics observed during testing. The stones retained heat abnormally long after being removed from a flame, produced a faint but audible vibration when struck, and left temporary discolorations on the skin of anyone who handled them without gloves. Most peculiar was Wilson's observation that small fragments placed in water appeared to move independently against the current, behavior he could attribute to no known mineral property. When questioned about the origin of the samples, Blackwood was uncharacteristically evasive, stating only that he had discovered them in a hidden place where the mountains speak. Wilson, intrigued but skeptical of the old man's mystical language, suggested sending the samples to geologists at the Colorado School of Mines for further analysis. According to Wilson's personal journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1903, Blackwood's reaction to this suggestion was immediate and alarming. His demeanor changed entirely, Wilson wrote. His face drained of color, and he seized my wrist with unexpected strength, insisting I return every fragment. When I hesitated, he leaned close and whispered, "I can hear you through the stone." He departed in evident agitation, taking all samples with him despite my scientific objections. Following his visit to the assay office, observers noted a marked change in Blackwood's behavior. Martha Collins, who operated a supply store in Silverton, recorded in her business ledger that Blackwood's purchasing patterns shifted dramatically in September 1892. Nathan bought enough provisions to last through winter, though autumn had barely begun. Her entry states, he added unusual items to his typical order: 5 pounds of salt, unusual herbs I typically stock for the Chinese miners, and all the mirror glass I had in stock. When I inquired as to his needs, he said only, "To keep what's outside from coming in." Collins further noted that Blackwood's typically meticulous appearance had deteriorated, his clothing soiled, and his beard unkempt. With a haunted vacancy in his eyes, she found deeply unsettling. Similar observations came from others who encountered Blackwood during this period. Jacob Miller, a trapper who had occasionally shared hunting grounds with the old mountain man, reported encountering him on a rarely used mountain trail in early October. In a statement given to the county sheriff in 1893, Miller described finding Blackwood mumbling to himself, his clothes disheveled, his normally keen eyes bloodshot and darting. "He didn't recognize me at first," Miller stated. "When he did, he grabbed my arm and said, 'They're coming through the cracks, Jacob. The mountain is opening up.'" Miller attempted to escort Blackwood to town, concerned for his mental state, but the old man refused violently, fleeing into the forest with surprising speed. Samuel Redfield, a hunter who passed near Blackwood's cabin in late September, reported hearing rhythmic hammering at all hours and observing smoke of an unusual purple hue rising from the chimney, though he did not approach close enough to investigate further. The last confirmed interaction with Nathan Blackwood occurred on the 28th of October, 1892. Thomas Fletcher, a mining company scout searching for new claim opportunities, sought shelter at Blackwood's cabin as an early snowstorm descended upon the mountains. Fletcher survived to provide the only eyewitness account of what the cabin had become in its final days of occupation. In a detailed statement given to the Silverton Sentinel newspaper in November 1892, Fletcher described finding the cabin transformed. Every window was covered with small mirrors, arranged in elaborate patterns that reflected fractured images of the surrounding forest. Symbols I didn't recognize were carved into the door frames and windowsills. Salt lines crossed thresholds and surrounded the perimeter of the building. The interior walls, once decorated with pelts, were now covered with drawings, crude renderings of what appeared to be human figures, though distorted in ways that made my skin crawl. Each figure lacked proper features, having instead dark voids where eyes should be and too many fingers on elongated hands. Blackwood himself, according to Fletcher, barely resembled the capable mountain man of previous accounts. He was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling. His once robust frame had withered, and a strange odor clung to him, reminiscent of wet stone and something metallic like blood. He permitted me entry but insisted I sleep near the fireplace within a circle of those strange purple-veined stones. He himself remained awake all night, watching the walls, as if expecting them to move. Fletcher noted that Blackwood repeatedly checked the mirrors, adjusting their positions throughout the evening while muttering calculations and phrases in what sounded like Latin mixed with unfamiliar words Fletcher could not identify. Despite his obvious deterioration, Blackwood maintained enough awareness to prepare a meal and offer basic hospitality, though Fletcher described feeling increasingly uneasy as the night progressed. Fletcher's account of that night provides the first documentation of the phenomena that would later become associated with the cabin. Around midnight, I was awakened by what sounded like whispers coming from behind the walls, he reported. Not the wind, nor animals in the eaves, but distinct voices speaking words just beyond comprehension. They rose and fell in rhythmic patterns, sometimes seeming to form recognizable phrases before dissolving again into unintelligible sounds. The whispers exhibited an almost liquid quality, as if spoken under water, yet carried clearly through the solid timber walls. Fletcher described Blackwood sitting motionless in a wooden chair, watching a particular section of wall where the whispers seemed loudest. When Fletcher asked what he was hearing, Blackwood replied without shifting his gaze, "They found a way through. The thin place is tearing." According to Fletcher, the old mountain man spent the night recounting a bizarre tale about discovering a narrow fissure in a cave deep within the mountain approximately 3 months earlier. He claimed the crack led somewhere that wasn't part of our world, Fletcher stated. Said he'd reached through and touched something cold that grabbed back, brought out those strange stones. After that, he said, the voices started, first in the cave, then following him home, getting louder each night. Blackwood described the entities behind the voices as wearing shapes that only pretend to be human, and insisted they were searching for ways to widen the fissure. Most disturbing to Fletcher was Blackwood's claim that the voices had begun speaking to him using the voices of people he had known throughout his life, including deceased family members. "They know everything about me now," Blackwood whispered. "They've tasted my thoughts, and soon they'll wear my memories in bodies, almost like mine." Fletcher described leaving at first light, deeply unnerved by both Blackwood's tale and his own experience. As I departed, Blackwood pressed one of those strange stones into my hand. Fletcher recalled in his statement to the Silverton Sentinel. He said, "Carry this. They'll follow your scent otherwise." The stone remembers what it touched on the other side, and they fear it now. I accepted it merely to placate him, but strangely found myself unwilling to discard it. During my journey back to Silverton, the weight of it in my pocket provided an inexplicable comfort as I traveled through the silent forest. Fletcher noted that Blackwood's final words to him were a warning. "Don't look back if you hear your name called. What uses your name isn't what you think it is." The journey to town typically took 6 hours on horseback, but Fletcher claimed to have made it in just over 4, pushing his mount to unusual speed despite the hazardous conditions. Upon reaching Silverton, Fletcher immediately reported his concerns about Blackwood's mental state to Sheriff James Harrington. The sheriff's log, preserved in county records, contains a brief entry. October 29, 1892, Thomas Fletcher reports Nathan Blackwood exhibiting signs of mountain hysteria and possible delirium, claims to hear voices, and has defaced his own property with superstitious markings. No indication of threat to self or others. No action warranted at present. Harrington, according to later testimony, dismissed Fletcher's account as the product of isolation-induced paranoia, a common enough condition among mountain dwellers that it had acquired its own regional terminology. No immediate action was taken to check on Blackwood, a decision that would later be heavily criticized when subsequent events came to light. Fletcher, finding no official interest in his concerns, reportedly shared his experience at the town saloon that evening, where his account was met with similar skepticism. When Blackwood failed to make his usual supply trip to Silverton in December 1892, Martha Collins mentioned her concern to Sheriff Harrington. Her ledger indicated Blackwood had sufficient provisions to last until February at most, and his absence from town was unprecedented in his decade of residence. Winter conditions made the journey to Blackwood's cabin impossible until April 1893, when Sheriff Harrington led a small party including Deputy William Hayes and local guide Samuel Redfield to investigate. The official report, filed on the 18th of April 1893 and preserved in the county records, described a scene of abandonment without explanation. "Cabin appears intact and undisturbed," Harrington wrote. "No sign of violence or struggle. Food remains on table, partially consumed. Fire long extinguished but laid as if for lighting. Blackwood's rifle stands by door. His winter coat hangs on peg. No tracks visible due to recent snowmelt." Most peculiar are the extensive modifications to the interior, walls covered with incomprehensible writings and drawings, mirrors arranged in patterns throughout, circles of unusual stones on floor. No remains or indication of Blackwood's whereabouts discovered. The report further noted that despite the cabin being abandoned throughout winter, no animals had entered or disturbed the contents, unusual in a region where scavengers typically invaded any unoccupied structure. Deputy Hayes, in a personal letter to his brother, discovered decades later in family archives, described finding dried herbs hanging in peculiar arrangements from the rafters and jars containing unidentifiable substances that emitted odors so foul they induced immediate nausea. Most disturbing, according to Hayes, was a trapdoor discovered beneath a bearskin rug, leading to a small, excavated chamber containing nothing but a single wooden chair facing a wall covered entirely with mirrors. The wall opposite the mirrors bore a single phrase carved repeatedly into the wood: "They wear familiar faces." News of Blackwood's disappearance and the strange condition of his cabin spread quickly through the scattered communities of the San Juan Mountains. Initially, many assumed the old man had wandered off in a state of confusion and succumbed to the elements, a common enough fate in the unforgiving mountains. However, the peculiar details of the cabin's interior, combined with Fletcher's published account of his last night there, sparked more sinister theories. The Silverton Sentinel's May 1893 article describing the sheriff's findings generated considerable local interest, with miners and trappers contributing their own observations of Blackwood's increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks before his disappearance. By summer 1893, Blackwood's cabin had become the focus of local superstition and morbid curiosity. Prospectors and trappers deliberately altered their routes to avoid passing near it. Those who camped in the vicinity reported unsettling experiences, whispers at night that seemed to call their names, sensations of being watched from just beyond the firelight, and dreams of dark figures that spoke with familiar voices, but were somehow wrong in ways they struggled to articulate upon waking. Martin Collins, who attempted to claim the apparently abandoned property in June 1893, abandoned his effort after spending only 2 nights in the cabin. His account, recorded in a notarized statement to the county clerk, described intolerable sensations of dread that intensified after sundown and reflections in the mirrors that moved independently of any source. Most alarming was his claim that on the second night, he distinctly heard Blackwood's voice emanating from the stone fireplace, though the words were twisted and stretched like taffy, forming sounds no human throat should produce. Local Ute guides refused to approach within a mile of the site, referring to it in their language as the place where the skin comes off, a phrase anthropologists would later note had connections to traditional beliefs about entities that could wear human appearances. In August 1893, Professor William Matthews of the newly established Colorado Historical Society organized an expedition to document the cabin and surrounding area. Matthews, a folklorist with an interest in frontier settlements, dismissed the supernatural rumors, but considered the Blackwood disappearance worthy of scholarly investigation. His team included Thomas Fletcher, who reluctantly agreed to return as a guide, and 2 university students, Robert Jenkins and Michael Sullivan, serving as assistants. Matthews' journal, later published in the Historical Society's quarterly bulletin, described their methodical documentation of the cabin. "The interior modifications are indeed extensive and bizarre," he wrote. "The symbols carved into the woodwork share characteristics with various protective sigils found in both European and Native American traditions, though combined in ways I've not encountered in any established practice. Most intriguing is the apparent linguistic evolution visible in the wall writings, beginning with recognizable English near the door and progressively transforming into an unknown script as one moves toward the rear of the structure. The expedition cataloged over 40 distinct symbols recurring throughout the cabin, many incorporating mirrored elements that created optical illusions when viewed from different angles." Matthews noted that the mirrors were positioned to reflect each other in complex patterns that filled the cabin with fractured light during certain hours. "The arrangement suggests not decoration but function," he observed. Blackwood appears to have been constructing an elaborate optical apparatus, though its purpose remains obscure. The purple-veined stones, arranged in precise circles throughout the cabin, exhibited unusual properties when disturbed. "When repositioned even slightly," Matthews recorded, "an immediate sensation of wrongness permeates the space, accompanied by auditory disturbances best described as whispering at the threshold of perception." Fletcher refused to remain in the cabin after sundown, establishing camp some distance away, while Matthews and his assistants continued their investigation by lamplight, following clues from Blackwood's journals found in the cabin. Matthews' expedition located a narrow cave entrance approximately 2 miles northwest of the cabin. The opening, nearly hidden behind a stand of stunted pines on a steep hillside, would have been impossible to find without the precise directions from Blackwood's writings. Fletcher initially refused to enter, claiming it was the source of Blackwood's madness and warning that some doors aren't meant to be opened again. Matthews and his assistant Sullivan proceeded alone, discovering a tight passage that descended steeply into the mountain. Matthews' journal entries regarding the cave exploration grow increasingly disjointed, the typically meticulous handwriting becoming erratic. He described reaching a chamber approximately 40 feet below the surface where a narrow fissure split the rear wall from floor to ceiling. "The crack appears natural at first glance," he wrote, "varying between 2 and 6 inches in width, extending approximately 7 feet in height. Closer examination reveals peculiarities that defy geological explanation. The crack emits no draft, yet creates a sensation of movement, as if air were being exchanged with somewhere else. Most remarkable is the acoustics. Whispers echo, but seem to return altered, containing sounds we did not produce." Matthews documented strange mineral formations surrounding the fissure, noting that the purple-veined stones identical to those found in Blackwood's cabin appeared to be growing from the rock face rather than forming through typical geological processes. After 30 minutes in the chamber, Sullivan complained of severe headaches and disorientation, describing a sensation of thoughts that aren't mine moving behind my eyes. They collected samples of the stones found near the fissure and retreated. Matthews' final entry that night reads simply, "Fletcher was right. We should not have entered. Something followed us out. It moves in our shadows when we aren't watching directly." Upon returning to Denver, Matthews became obsessively focused on the stone samples and his notes from the expedition. Colleagues reported his increasing seclusion and erratic behavior. Professor James Wilson of the Geology Department noted in a letter to the Historical Society Board that Matthews had converted his office into a makeshift laboratory, covering the windows with black cloth and installing an unusual arrangement of mirrors, similar to those found in Blackwood's cabin. Matthews was observed working through the night, often speaking aloud to himself in what witnesses described as conversations with absent parties. His academic writing, previously noted for its clarity and precision, became increasingly disjointed and filled with neologisms and obscure references. In October 1893, he published a brief, controversial paper titled Liminal Spaces in Mountain Folklore, the Blackwood Case Study. In it, he proposed that certain geographic locations might serve as thin points between different planes of existence, a theory that damaged his academic credibility and led to formal censure from the Historical Society Board. Matthews responded to criticism by becoming further isolated, refusing visitors and communicating only through increasingly alarming notes slipped under his office door. In December 1893, Matthews was committed to the Colorado State Insane Asylum in Pueblo after colleagues found him destroying the walls of his office with a geological hammer, claiming he needed to seal the voices inside. Hospital records indicate he was admitted after attempting to create a door of mirrors in his office and insisting that entities he called the Hollow Ones were speaking through the walls. He remained institutionalized until his death 3 years later, diagnosed with degenerative paranoia with acute hallucinatory episodes. His final coherent statement, recorded by an attending physician, was, "Blackwood found a tear in the world. It's still widening. They wear our dead like clothing." Following the Matthews expedition and Fletcher's disappearance, the area surrounding Blackwood's cabin developed a reputation that effectively quarantined it. Local guides refused to lead hunting or prospecting parties anywhere near the site, claiming the forest itself became wrong as one approached. Native Ute guides specifically warned against approaching the area, referring to it as the place where the world is thin, and maintaining that spirits who entered there forgot they were dead and tried to become people again. Maps produced by the U.S. Geological Survey in 1895 show a conspicuous blank space where the cabin should have been located, while railway surveys planning routes through the mountains deliberately altered their course to maintain a minimum 5-mile distance from the site. Despite, or perhaps because of, its notorious reputation, the cabin occasionally attracted the curious or desperate. Between 1,894 and 1,899, county records document at least 7 individuals or small groups known to have ventured to the cabin. A Yale anthropologist and his assistant in 1894 seeking to disprove the mountain superstitions. 3 miners in 1896, allegedly following rumors of gold deposits near the cave. A spiritualist medium and her companion in early 1898, hoping to contact entities from beyond the veil. 2 photographers from Denver in late 1898, intending to document the site for a sensationalist newspaper article. None returned. Search parties reported finding abandoned equipment, strange arrangements of stones, and in the case of the photographers, a series of exposed glass plates that, when developed, showed only blurred images resembling elongated human figures standing in the cabin's doorway. County Sheriff Michael Roberts, after leading 3 unsuccessful recovery operations, officially declared the area hazardous and recommended its complete avoidance in a public notice published in regional newspapers in February 1899. "Whatever natural danger exists at the former Blackwood property," he wrote, "it has claimed enough lives. The county can no longer justify risking search parties in this location." In June 1899, following the disappearance of 2 well-connected Denver tourists who had ignored warnings about the cabin, Colorado Governor Charles Thomas ordered a formal investigation. State Marshal Robert Dawson led a team of 6 deputies to the site with instructions to determine what, if any, natural dangers might be responsible for the disappearances, and to bring back concrete explanations that would put an end to the ridiculous superstitions hindering proper development of the region. The Marshal's official report, submitted on the 28th of June 1899, represents the last documented examination of the Blackwood cabin before subsequent events altered it permanently. Dawson described finding the structure in a remarkable state of preservation considering its abandonment, noting that the interior remains as described in previous accounts, with additions suggesting multiple visitors have contributed to the bizarre modifications. The report detailed evidence of recent occupancy despite no survivors having returned from the site, including fresh candle wax, disturbed dust patterns, and a journal dated April 1899 containing only 3 entries before trailing into illegible scrawls. Most significantly, Dawson reported that his team excavated beneath the cabin after noticing that the floorboards in one corner had been removed and the earth disturbed. Approximately 4 feet below the surface, they discovered a cache containing personal effects, watches, rings, coins, photographs, identifiable as belonging to several individuals known to have disappeared in the area. No human remains were found in association with these items. The report noted that each object had been carefully arranged in a precise pattern resembling the constellations visible in the northern sky, with a purple-veined stone placed at the center. Dawson, a veteran lawman known for his skepticism, included an unusual personal note in his official report. "While I document these findings with professional detachment, I must acknowledge that the atmosphere of this location produces effects on the mind that defy rational explanation. Even the most hardened members of my team report sensations of being observed from within the surrounding forest." Marshal Dawson's report includes a detailed account of his team's final night at the cabin, a narrative he later attempted to have stricken from the official record through formal request to the governor's office. At approximately 2:17 a.m., all members of the party were awakened by what can only be described as whispers emanating from the walls, he wrote. The sounds formed recognizable words in English, though the voices speaking them were distorted in quality and seemed to echo abnormally. Shadows moved independently of any light source. The temperature within the cabin dropped precipitously despite the summer weather. Most disturbing were the voices, which addressed each man by name and spoke using phrases and references that suggested intimate knowledge of our private lives and thoughts. According to Dawson, the phenomena escalated throughout the night. Deputy James Wilson reported seeing his reflection in one of the mirrors continue moving after he stood still. Deputy Michael Harris claimed to observe a dark figure standing in the corner that disappeared when directly approached, but reappeared when viewed peripherally. Most alarming was Dawson's description of the purple-veined stones beginning to emit a faint luminescence that intensified as the night progressed. By dawn, Deputies Thomas Clark and William Johnson were missing. Extensive searches found no trace of them within a 5-mile radius of the cabin. The remaining team, against Dawson's orders, doused the cabin with kerosene from their supplies and set it ablaze before departing. Dawson noted that the fire burned with unusual colors, purple and green flames intermixed with the normal orange, and the whispers seemed to increase in volume as the structure was consumed. His report concludes with the observation that as the team departed, each man independently reported hearing their own voice, calling from the burning structure, asking for help in increasingly desperate tones. Marshal Dawson ended his service shortly after filing this report, retiring to his family farm in eastern Colorado, where he refused all further inquiries regarding the Blackwood investigation. The burning of Blackwood's cabin marked the end of its physical presence, but not its influence on the region. Despite the fire, which deputies reported burned hot enough to reduce the logs to ash, subsequent visitors to the site found no charred remains. By 1900, there was no visible evidence that a structure had ever occupied the clearing, not even foundation stones or ash deposits. The land where the cabin once stood remains uninhabited to this day. A geological survey team in 1926 noted the area contained a notable absence of wildlife and vegetation within a perfect circle approximately 100 yards in diameter. The land remains marked on Forest Service maps with the simple notation, "unsuitable for development." Modern hikers and backcountry enthusiasts report unusual phenomena in the vicinity. Unexplained temperature drops, disorienting effects that interfere with compasses and GPS devices, and most commonly, whispers that seem to emanate from the ground itself. In 1976, a geological survey team investigating the region discovered a cave system matching the description from Matthew's journal. Their equipment experienced unexplained malfunctions, and the project was abandoned after 3 team members developed severe, persistent headaches and auditory hallucinations that continued long after they left the mountains. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2018 when two wilderness photographers went missing while attempting to locate the former cabin site for a historical documentary. Their equipment was found 3 weeks later, arranged in a precise circle at the presumed location. Audio from their recovered recording devices contained only static, punctuated by indistinct whispers that audio specialists described as containing speech patterns but not produced by human vocal cords. What happened to Nathan Blackwood in that remote mountain cabin? What did he discover in the cave that so fundamentally altered him and the place he called home? The answers remain elusive, but one conclusion seems inescapable. Some boundaries in our world were not meant to be crossed, and some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again.